someplace else.
Well, you want to, there are lots of things you can do.
Yeah.
But one thing you can do is if the spouse in the home dies first, it can be held in a trust that's not a Medi-Cal that doesn't affect Medi-Cal eligibility, so that the spouse who's in the skilled nursing facility has a safety net.
So it's sort of like a special needs trust.
It is a special needs trust, and I don't know how familiar people are with that. On the other hand, you also want to make sure that should the spouse in the skilled nursing facility die, you want to make sure that there are no assets remaining in that spouse's name, because not on the spouse in the nursing home's death, but on the death of both spouses, the Department of Health Services has a right to come back and recover the costs they paid for the care of the person in the skilled nursing facility. And they do that up to the amount that that person owned. So if you're able, as part of the Medi-Cal planning, to take all the property out of the name of the ill spouse and put it in the well spouse's name, then the recovery will never happen because there's nothing to recover against.
Okay.
So that's kind of in the estate planning.
Okay, time is going to be going here. Maybe briefly, what if you have a disabled child? We've been talking about the spouse type situation.
Right.
Can disabled children also qualify for Medi-Cal in some cases?
Well, disabled children have many routes, and so they don't necessarily need long-term care. They may have categorically approved Medi-Cal benefits because they receive SSI, but age is not a factor in qualifying for long-term care benefits being in a skilled nursing facility. It's, are you disabled or are you aged, and are you living in a skilled nursing facility?
Okay, so maybe we're not going to have time probably to get into in depth, but mostly wanted to point out to people is that this can be a route in some cases, and you need to go over the alternatives with somebody like yourself.
Many ways to qualify for Medi-Cal benefits, and this, we're talking about a very small way.
Okay. Okay, when you're on Medi-Cal, is there an amount that you actually have to pay each month?
Yes, you are assessed a share of cost, and a share of cost is similar to a monthly deductible that you have to pay. You have to pay the first X number of dollars, and that amount is determined by what the income of the person who's in the skilled nursing facility, what that person's income is, and what the spouse in the home needs. And it's a balance between those. So for the most part, the general rule is you pay what you have as income, but you provide for your spouse first up to a minimum amount, and then with proper planning and possibly court approval, you can increase that amount for the spouse in the home.
Okay. So we've talked a little bit around this issue about benefits being repaid. So let's talk a little bit more in detail for just a moment about that situation. So the person who was getting the care now has passed away.
Right.
And I've heard that they'll just come and take your house. I mean, there's what these ladies talk about, or people talk about, the hairdresser or whatever, and sometimes they may be myths. So maybe you can help to clarify what is really available.
The state can recover the costs of what they paid for somebody in a skilled nursing facility.
Okay.
They do not do that if there is a surviving spouse, or if there is a disabled child, or if there's a child who's under 21 who lives in the home. They will not recover during those periods. When both spouses die, the state may come and ask to be repaid from the heirs of the of those
Yeah, both
of the family.
Family, yeah, both
For the
parents
beneficiaries.
both parents who have both
Right.
passed away.
Now, the state is limited to only that which the Medi-Cal beneficiary owned.
Mm-hmm.
So, if the Medi-Cal beneficiary has given all of his or her property to the spouse in the home, let's say husband's in the skilled nursing facility, and he gives everything he owns to the community, his wife,
Yes, who's still living
then
in the
there's
home.
no recovery because there's nothing left from that the state can recover against. Certain assets right now are non-recoverable. So retirement benefits, they do not recover against retirement benefits.
Okay.
They don't recover against life insurance proceeds where the policy is owned by somebody else.
So put
So-
the policy in an irrevocable life insurance trust, or the children can own the policy, or whatever.
Right. So there are lots of ways to avoid recovery, and that's part of the planning that you want to do in advance to make sure you have the power to transfer, it's actually called transmute property between spouses, or give the property away in an appropriate way if you're a single Medi-Cal beneficiary.
Yeah. So anyway,
So
well,
no, they don't come and take the house.
They don't necessarily come and take the house. But what we are saying, though, is that this is not a conventional estate plan that we're talking about. That we need to look at when we have somebody that we think is going to be getting in this situation to provide for arranging their affairs, first of all, so that they'll qualify, and secondly, to preserve the assets the best that we can in their situation, and including having the special language for special needs trusts and the other
I
things.
discuss this with all my clients, whether they're ready or not, because you never know when it will happen. So we look at every client has the opportunity and the advice about what is available to them should a catastrophic event occur. So I think it's a very important thing to consider. It is unique in an estate plan. There are a lot of powers, and you have to be aware of what's ultimately available to you, and if it is ever a possibility.
Yeah, and these days, I was just talking with a person here about the situation, of so many people passing away from Alzheimer's and so forth that we didn't see at one time, and what it all comes from is that people are living so much longer, and so now they're getting these senior ailments that we didn't see at one time so much. Right. And so anyway, so it behooves all of us to think about these things as part of our planning. Jan, we just have maybe about 45 seconds. So do you have maybe a final word of wisdom as we wrap this thing up?
Well, yes. Don't believe everything your neighbor tells you, because there's usually a way to solve most of these problems and make sure that the spouse and the family can be well provided for. There are all sorts of vehicles for all sorts of disabilities and all sorts of ways to preserve the estate, and disinheritance is not necessarily the best way.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for joining me today.
Absolutely.
Maybe we'll get together on another topic sometime.
Okay.
Folks, this is a very important area, and I hope you'll take it seriously, dealing with Medicare planning, and that you'll talk with your attorney about it. And we'll see you next time on Financial Insider Weekly.